you guys, my name is Jillian and I'm the Connection Director here at Northwest Church. Today we are going to dive deeper into a very important topic, Safe Sanctuary. So Safe Sanctuary is a program that we at Northwest Church have put in place to train and equip our staff and volunteers on how to keep our children, youth, and young adults safe. We value our children and we believe that we as a church body have a responsibility to see them grow strong in the Lord. So one way we do this is by ensuring they have a safe place to grow and develop. To better understand the gravity of this topic, let's review some statistics. Approximately 1 in every 4 girls and 1 in every 6 boys are sexually abused before the age of 18, according to the CDC. 35.8% of sexual assault occurs when the victim is between the ages of 12 and 17. Sexual abuse of a minor is the number 1 for top 5 reasons why churches end up in court. And did you know that 93% of sex offenders describe themselves as religious? And this category of offenders may be the most dangerous. They say that they have more victims and younger victims. Additionally, only 6% of child molesters have ever been convicted, and the U.S. Department of Justice estimates that only 30% of sexual assault cases were reported to authorities. So let's take this and make it local. Did you know that in Federal Way alone, there are 43 registered sex offenders, 61 in Auburn, 3 in Edgewood, 8 in Milton, and a staggering 328 in Tacoma? That is substantial, and we need to be aware of the gravity of this. Did you know that most children who are molested know their victimizer? Only 10% of children are abused by a stranger. That means that 90% know their abuser. The younger the child victim is, the more likely the perpetrator is an older child or teenager. So let that sink in. That's heavy and it's real, and it's happening to children and youth every single day. And the church is no exception. So we must be trained and we must be vigilant to protect our kids. God has a plan for every child's life, and hell has a plan to delay the full fulfillment of God's plan. The impact of sexual abuse on a child's life is huge. Now, can you imagine the impact of sexual abuse happening in the church? The place they're supposed to be cared for, safe, nurtured. That can gravely impact the course of a child's life and gravely impact their relationship with God. We as a church body have a responsibility to protect them and see that God's plan is fulfilled in their lives. So how do we do this? In this next video, we will discuss our most vulnerable locations in this church and what to look for. So taking a look at the map on the screen here, you can see that our campus is actually pretty big, and you may not have known that. Maybe you only come for weekend services and you head from the foyer to the sanctuary to the gym, and that's it. But we actually have a lot of classrooms. We have an upstairs, we have a downstairs, we have the gym, and we have the entire outside as well. So actually, there are quite a few vulnerable areas that we have here on campus. So let's go over a few. And the first thing that I always point out is storage. That is downstairs and it is quite vast. And so we want to make sure that on weekends when children are in the building, that those doors are closed. The next is the M wing. And so that is the main wing. It's behind the gym. There's the chapel and the banquet room are in there too. And those aren't always a super populated areas. Next are some of the back staircases. So we actually have 2. One is located by the M wing, and then the other one is downstairs in between the L wing, in between L1 and L2. And both of those have covered areas and are not super populated. So those are 2 good areas to be aware of. Next is the exit by the gym. There's also a covered area over there. And sometimes there are people that are hanging out over there, and we just want to make sure that we have eyes on that. Behind the sanctuary, there are restrooms and a long hallway, and that is another unpopulated area that doesn't have as much visibility. So we want to be aware of that location. And then we also have the L wing, which is our lower level. This is where all of our elementary classrooms are. This is where the youth meet during the week. And then there's also meetings throughout the week that happen downstairs as well. And additionally, we have plenty of different closets from gym closets to custodial closets. We have kitchen closets and things of the like, usher's closet. And so we want to make sure that those doors remain closed and locked at all times as well. So now that we're aware, what do we do to prevent? I talked about this a little bit at the beginning. We want to make sure for storage that we keep those doors closed and locked at all times. So you can help us out. If you see them open, please close them. Additionally, we have the L wing is locked and closed during weekends, especially during weekend services. We make sure that the classrooms are each individually locked. And the C wing, which is where our preschool kids are kept on the weekend, we make sure that that's locked from both entrances. Additionally, we have something on the weekend called campus oversight, and that is a volunteer role that essentially acts as security for the weekends. They patrol the building, they're going outside, they're checking the parking lot, they're checking the classrooms, they're making sure doors are locked, and they're keeping their eyes out for any suspicious activity. Another thing we have in place is our 2 deep rule. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then additionally is if you see something, say something. And I know that you're probably at home watching this video right now, but I want you to practice this with me. We're going to say it together. Ready? If you see something, say something. And that is always a good rule of thumb. If there is any suspicious activity, if you see anyone loitering in hallways or being somewhere where you don't think that they should be, please say something. We want to make sure that we are working together as a team for the safety of our children and for the safety of our volunteers as well. It does not take long for abuse to occur. So by reviewing the map of the building, it helps us to first be aware of vulnerable areas, and secondly, it should keep us vigilant while we're on campus together. Like I said, we are a team. I can't do this by myself. Children's ministry can't do this by themselves. We must work together to keep our campus safe. And so this is where you guys come in. And it's so good that we are watching these videos together, reviewing the map together, and we want to keep our eyes out at all times. And remember, if you see something, say something. We recognize that children and youth need loving and meaningful touch. So we've put together guidelines in place to protect both the children and you as volunteers in this area. At the beginning of class, you should have read through the appropriate touch document. So we're going to take a couple of minutes to review this. Let's take a moment to discuss guidelines for behaviors in classrooms and events. First is no picking up a child over the age of 3, no tickling or grabbing children. And ultimately, these actions are very intimate as it causes involuntary responses of the child. And we don't want to make them feel uncomfortable or out of control. And so we want to refrain from tickling or grabbing or anything that would cause those involuntary responses. Next, we have a rule of no lap sitting over the age of 3. We want to be above reproach as volunteers, and we do recognize that the desire to sit on your lap is typically a cry to attention, which isn't a bad thing. But we can appease this by having them sit next to us, and if it becomes a problem and the child becomes inconsolable or continues to cry, we can involve the person in charge if necessary. Next, another important piece is no touching a child under the clothing, unless you are doing diaper changing. We recognize that comes with that, but again, you guys will have a bit more conversations about this entire list with your children's ministry leaders in your trainings. So if you have more questions on any of these guidelines, please refer back to Ronnalee Burley, Ashley Rosato, or Ava Carver, and they will definitely be able to unpack this in a little bit more depth. It's helpful to remember that while these behaviors may be appropriate with your own child, they are not with other people's children. And so that is the tension that we have to hold here as volunteers. Please use wisdom and discernment and grab a staff member if you have any questions. We have a couple procedures in place to help with this. First is background checks. Volunteers are presumed to be trusted no matter what ministry they are in, which in all assumptions makes them a trusted adult. So we make sure that every single volunteer fills out and clears a background check. Next, I mentioned this earlier, but we abide in a 2 deep rule with all children and youth under the age of 18. This means that there must always be at least 2 approved volunteers with any child or youth. This includes on-campus and off-campus Northwest Church events, including transportation. Next, all Northwest Church staff and volunteers working directly with children, youth, or vulnerable adults must view the child abuse video each year and sign off on all the policies and protocols regarding the protection of children, youth, and vulnerable adults, which is exactly what you're doing right now as you watch these videos. When working with children, youth, and vulnerable adults, it is expected that physical boundaries will be respected. We have different guidelines in place for different ages. For children under the age of 3, we recognize the need for more one-on-one contact and comfort. But for children ages 6 through 17, we do have different guidelines. So let's review those. So touching their hand for comfort, that is totally fine. If you have a child in front of you that is crying or needs to be comforted, you can touch their hand, you can touch their shoulder, and also a pat on the back is okay. But we want to make sure that it is the upper back only, because the lower back is actually really an intimate spot, and we do not want to encroach on their boundaries, and we want to protect both them and you. So additionally, side hugs, those are okay. A one arm hug, a side hug, and then also a high five. That is always okay. A couple more policies that we do have in place is we want to make sure for our youth and for our young adults that we do individual ministry by the same sex. That is super important, as oftentimes with these ministry moments, it's deep, it's personal, and we want to make sure that it's done in a safe way. And with a man and a woman with a woman, it helps to just clear out any issues that may arise with that. If you have any questions or need to clarify on any of the topics that we just reviewed, please don't hesitate to reach out to your ministry leader. They would be more than happy to talk about these guidelines and appropriate touch with you on a one-on-one basis. So don't hesitate to reach out and ask. So by now you should have completed reading through the Child, Youth, and Vulnerable Adults document, and we're going to take a moment to review that. The document starts off by listing a couple different types of abuse. That is physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. So we're going to take a couple minutes to define this. So physical abuse, that is any physical injury to a child that results by other than accidental means. Next is sexual abuse, any incident of sexual or inappropriate touching or expression to a child or youth. Emotional abuse, any harm to a child's ability to reason, capacity to think, or emotional well-being caused by an adult's cruelty or lack of care. And lastly, neglect, a lack of care that causes harm or substantial risk of harm to a child, including failure to provide adequate food, clothing, supervision, or medical care. Please familiarize yourself with both the physical and behavioral indicators of the different kinds of abuse. It is important to note that these indicators are simply possible warning signs and do not automatically mean that a child has been abused. So, let's say you have seen an indicator of abuse on a child. You now have suspicion of abuse. What do you do next? First, we'll discuss procedure for suspicion of abuse outside the church, meaning that a child has been abused at home or school and is now on our campus. So in the case of suspicion of abuse outside the church, you should immediately contact the person in charge or your ministry leader, who will then contact the CPS delegate. From there, an incident report should be completed. Consulting with the Northwest Church CPS delegate is very important, since there are some things that might present as evidence of abuse, but may not be the case. So the CPS delegate will determine the course of action to be enacted. Please do not try to investigate by asking too many questions or leading questions, as that could hurt an investigation. If we see something, we want to say something, and then we want to entrust the process to the Northwest Church CPS delegate. So, next we are going to discuss suspicion of abuse inside the church. Though we hope to never be in this situation as a church, it is important that we are prepared to handle these situations with integrity. The CPS delegate is to immediately do the following. First, they will contact the senior pastor, and this should be done prior to any decision-making or interviewing. And then the person in charge or ministry leader should be included in the process when it is appropriate. Next, we'll have the Safe Sanctuary team called in to assist with next steps, decision-making, investigation, and alerting government agency as needed. So this piece is also very important. The person suspected or accused of abuse is to be immediately suspended from volunteering in any ministry at Northwest Church. The purpose of this is to protect the potential victim, the person being accused, and the church. So again, all of this is located in that document from the very beginning of class. So you can review this at any time, and if you have any additional questions, reach out to your ministry leader. And at the end of the day, if you see something, say something. Ultimately, Safe Sanctuary is not just an annual training. If we are truly going to keep our children and youth safe, this must be applied and put into practice every day. To help aid you in this, we have developed 5 Safe Sanctuary keys that will be reviewed during trainings, team meetings, and throughout the year. So let's review them together. The first is 2 deep rule. Remember, this means 2 background-checked individuals must always be with a child or youth while on campus or off-site at a Northwest Church event. Next is appropriate touch. We have different guidelines for different age groups that must be followed to protect both the child and you. Please review that document as often as needed. Third is background check. So volunteers are assumed to be trusted. If you have a name badge on, that says safe to a child. So we make sure that each volunteer has filled out and cleared a background check every 2 years. Fourth is accountability. So we are accountable to each other, to our team, and to God. Ultimately, we can't do this by ourselves, and so we must work as a team to keep Northwest Church safe. And lastly, if you see something, say something. We expect you to follow these policies, and if you see someone else crossing these boundaries, say something. Using your best judgment, a gentle reminder in the moment to the individual, and a follow-up with your ministry leader is always the best way to go. We recognize that these topics are heavy and that the reality of sexual abuse in and out of the church is a scary thing. This is why we have protocols and procedures in place. This is why we have Safe Sanctuary. Thank you for caring about the safety and future of our children and youth. Together, we can keep Northwest Church a safe sanctuary.